All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Susana Meza. I'm a financial aid coordinator here at MSJC's financial aid office. And I'm accompanied today by my colleague, Sarah. I'll give her a minute to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm a financial aid technician too here at MSJC.
Cool. Thank you, Sarah. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll jump right in. Sarah, you can go ahead and pull up the presentation, please. And we'll go over our agenda for the day. All right. So thanks again, everybody, for joining our financial aid session today. Throughout the presentation, you can feel free to drop questions in the chat. We will have time for Q&A at the end. So hopefully we'll be able to get to all of your questions at that time. And I'll try my best to answer the questions as we go. So let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. All right, so on the agenda today, we're going to be talking about the application process for the different financial applications that we have. We're going to talk about the different financial aid programs that we offer here at MSJC. We're going to discuss some of our outreach offerings with our K-12 partners, and then we're going to dive into some of the eligibility criteria for different programs. And then, of course, we'll have that time at the end for our Q&A. Next slide, please. So just to get started, I know many of you probably are aware with this, especially with so many high schools making the financial application a graduation requirement for our seniors. So there are two different types of financial aid applications, and depending on the student's eligibility criteria, they're either going to complete the FAFSA or the CADA, which is the California Dream Act application. So really the difference between the two is if a student is completing the FAFSA, they'll be considered for both federal and state aid. And the criteria for a FAFSA would be if a student is a U.S. citizen, a permanent resident, eligible non-citizen, or a T visa holder. And if a student does not have does not meet any of that criteria, they'll be eligible to submit the California Dream Act application to be considered for state aid programs. And that criteria would be if a student maybe is undocumented, they have a valid or expired DACA, U visa holders have temporary protected status, or meet the non-resident exemption requirements under AB 540. So on the screenshots there, you'll see the difference. If a student is a returning user, they'll just return in using the same login each academic year. And if they're new, of course, they'll have to create their account. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about some really big important dates in the financial aid world. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the big October 1st date. So October 1st of every academic year or every year, the financial applications become available. So we always want to encourage students to do it as soon as October 1st hits. That way they're set to get and ready to go for the upcoming academic year to avoid any delays in processing. So, to prepare, we always encourage students to gather all of their documents they might need. If they're dependent students, assist their parents in gathering the documents they might need and get ready for that October 1st start date for the applications and get out of the way. If we were at any of your schools during this October season, you might find that so many folks are doing it and the website does tend to crash. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing that everybody is being proactive and being mindful of those dates. And then we just had a big March 2nd deadline as well. So that's the priority deadline for California, particularly for our Cal Grant recipients. So we always really want to encourage students to have their applications completed at least between that October 1st and March 2nd priority deadline to be considered for some state aid programs like Cal Grant. September 2nd is the deadline for community colleges only for Cal Grant GPA verification. So just something to keep in mind for those students that are going to be joining us here at MSJC. And then we do have two major disbursements in the financial aid office here at MSJC. So students that are eligible for financial aid will be receiving their disbursements in two parts. So we typically start off with our federal programs, and then our disbursement schedule is posted, so they'll understand at which point in the semester the state programs will be kicking into their bank mobile accounts. So we have the link posted there. Sometimes students maybe think that they're going to get, their full financial aid package right at the start of the semester. So really important to understand that, we do break that up, and the goal there is to help students allocate their financial aid throughout each term. Next slide, please. So some of the federal aid programs that we offer here at MSJC are Pell Grant, Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, Federal Work Study, and Federal Direct Loans. So Pell Grant is awarded to eligible undergrads pursuing their first bachelor degree, and some students enrolled in post-baccalaureate teaching certification or licensing programs. This award is based on students' EFCs, that's otherwise known as the Estimated Family Contribution, and their enrollment status. So that means whether they're enrolled in full-time, half-time, three-quarter time, or less than half-time, their amount will be prorated. The amount of Pell Grant student may receive over their lifetime is the equivalent of 6 years. Given that they're enrolled full-time, right? So if a student is enrolled full-time for 6 years, that equivalent would be the 600% and maximum amount for Pell. And then they actually can receive Pell Grant during fall, spring, and summer semesters, so during the full academic year. And then Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, we refer to it as FSEOG. That's awarded to undergrads pursuing their first bachelor or professional degree. And this grant is awarded to Pell recipients with the lowest EFCs first. So demonstrating that bigger financial need will be considered a priority for this program. And to receive this program, students are encouraged to apply for financial aid early and be enrolled in at least 6 units each semester, so at least that half-time status. And then Federal Work Study, this is a great program. It provides part-time jobs for undergraduate and graduate students who demonstrate financial need, allowing them to earn money to help pay towards their educational expenses. We often encourage students in this program to take community service work and work related to their course of study, so they can get that experience during their education. Funding for Federal Work Study is limited, so it's really important that students apply for consideration early and definitely before that priority deadline. And if any of you have assisted students during their financial application so far, there is a Federal Work Study question on the application. So it does ask if a student wishes to be considered for Federal Work Study. Indicating yes does not tie them into it. There is additional steps that need to be taken afterwards, but if they do indicate yes, they'll have part of the process then by the time they're ready to get the process started. And then we also have federal direct loans. So these are available to any eligible students whose financial needs are not being met by any other of the gift aid or any of the financial aid sources. Students must be enrolled in at least 6 units, so half-time, and complete their financial applications to be considered for the loans and to demonstrate that eligibility for them. We do always prefer to encourage students to apply for scholarships, work study, and other sources that don't require repayment before we reach the direct loan, just to ensure that they're financially prepared and taking advantage of all of the free gift aid before that. Next slide, please. So some of the state aid programs that we offer here are California College Promise Grant, otherwise known as CCPG. We have Cal Grant, Student Success Completion Grant, and Chafee Grant. So the California College Promise Grant, again, CCPG, this is a non-cash grant, usually referred to as a tuition fee waiver. This is eligible to California and AB 540 residents attending a California community college. In order to be considered for this program, students must submit their FAFSA or CATA applications each year. And if students are eligible and meeting the criteria, CCPG will cover their tuition for all 3 semesters, so fall, spring, and summer. And later on in the presentation, Sarah will talk a little bit more about some of that criteria for CCPG. And then Cal Grants, so these are awarded by the California Student Aid Commission for California residents. And to be eligible, students are encouraged to apply by the deadline. Again, we talked about that March 2nd deadline, and be enrolled at least half-time, so 6 units. All awards are prorated. So if a student is enrolled in less than 12 units each semester, they'll receive less than what's reflecting on their award letter. And then we always encourage students to create their account through web grants. That's very important, and check the status of their Cal Grant award and their GPA verifications. We've also recently launched a new program, which is kind of tied to this Cal Grant. So it's the California Dream Act Service Incentive Program. And this encourages California Dream Act applicants who are receiving a Cal Grant B award to perform community or volunteer service for additional aid. Eligible students for that can receive up to $3,000 per academic year. So it's a really great program that was recently launched for Dream Act students. And then the Student Success Completion Grant. So this provides students with supplemental financial aid to help offset that cost for community college attendance, and it encourages full-time enrollment and successful on-time completion. So students taking 15 or more units can receive up to a maximum award of $8,000. And to qualify, students need to be eligible for Cal Grant B or C award, meet Federal Satisfactory Academic Progress, SAP, which again, Sarah will talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation, and demonstrate an unmet financial need. So that takes the estimated family contribution and the cost of attendance to determine that need. And then of course, maintain full-time attendance here at MSJC. And then we also have Chafee grants available. So this provides need-based grants to foster youth and former foster youth to use towards their educational expenses. And to be eligible, students must have been a foster youth between ages 16 and 18, not have reached their 26th birthday as of July 1st of each academic year, and have been eligible to receive services from the Department of Social Services Independent Living Program. So if a student might meet this criteria, we really encourage them to reach out and get assistance with that to take advantage of the program and all of the additional funding that could be available to them. Next slide, please. So MSJC Promise is another great program that we have. It's very similar to California College Promise Grant because it's geared towards covering tuition. So MSJC Promise provides free tuition for first-time full-time college students. So a lot of our recent high school graduates are eligible to take advantage of this program. This is designed for students that aren't otherwise eligible for other aids, such as CCPG or any other tuition fee waivers. So if they're not meeting those income standards and aren't eligible, this is a good program for those first-time students. So some of the first-year eligibility requirements are, of course, they have to apply for admission, so be fully admitted into MSJC, be a California resident or exempt group, have a high school diploma or GED. And we're going to talk about a little bit more of these in our next slide, but it's really important that they are first-time full-time. So in those 12 units and joining us for the first time in the fall, and not have had any other units or transfer units from another institution. Students do have to be enrolled in and complete at least 12 units per term, so both fall and spring, to be awarded and considered for this program. And then of course, maintain that 2.0 GPA or above. Second year eligibility is very similar. So it'll cover the first 2 years as long as the students are meeting that criteria, if they're maintained enrollment each term, and they're maintaining that minimum GPA, and then of course they've submitted their FAFSA or Dream Act application and the new academic year as well. Next slide, please. So I talked a little about being a first-time student. So that means someone that has not had any transfer units, who has not attended another institution, and will be joining MSJC for the first time ever in the fall of the academic year. Students that do complete like concurrent, dual enrollment, or articulated any coursework during high school will still be considered. So that does not impact MSJC Promise eligibility. And then full-time, of course, here at MSJC, that means 12 units per semester. So we do award program MSJC Promise in the fall and spring semesters. So students will need to be meeting that 12 unit requirement for both of those semesters to be considered. There are accommodations that could be made if a student has accommodations through our ASC center. That could be noted for Promise. I believe students can be enrolled in as little as 9 units to be considered for Promise if they have those accommodation services. There is no additional application process for MSJC Promise. So the criteria is submitting your FAFSA or DREAM Act application and applying for enrollment at MSJC. Once we have those applications, we'll be able to determine which students are not being considered for any other aid programs, and then review their eligibility for MSJC Promise and award them that way. So the big takeaway for this program, though, is students do have to pay out of pocket for tuition at registration. So if they're not being considered for any other aid, that means they're enrolling. They do have to pay out of pocket. And then later in the semester, after census, when we review MSJC Promise eligibility, we will then reimburse students that are eligible and awarded whatever they paid out of pocket for tuition. So it does work that way. And a lot of folks ask, does MSJC Promise cover books and supplies? So typically we reimburse just what was expensed for tuition, but we have recently launched an MSJC Promise book grant. So that's a great addition to the program. So students that are meeting eligibility criteria for Promise and are being awarded Promise will be awarded an additional $500 book grant, and that's for each semester. So that could be a total of $1,000 per academic year to hopefully assist towards books and supplies and other resources they might need during the semester. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Sarah now, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the differences between CCPG and Promise and share other resources that we have available here at MSJC in our financial aid office.
All right. Thank you, Susana. So yeah, like Susana mentioned, they kind of function a little bit similarly, but they do have different requirements. So the first thing to note is that both the California College Promise Grant, or CCPG, and the MSJC Promise require a financial aid application to be submitted. So either the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act application. Where they start to differ is on the financial need. The MSJC Promise program does not require students to demonstrate any financial need, whereas the California College Promise Grant does. The MSJC Promise also requires students to have graduated from high school or the equivalent, so a GED or like a high school exit exam, things like that. And also, like Susana already mentioned, they would need to be a first-time college student, whereas the California College Promise Grant does not require proof of high school completion or the equivalent, and the student can be anywhere in their academic journey. They don't have to be a first-time student. MSJC Promise also requires that you need to be in at least 12 units for every semester in order to be eligible, whereas the California College Promise Grant, you only need to be enrolled in at least 1 unit in order to be eligible to receive that one. MSJC Promise, also like Susana already stated, the student needs to begin in the fall semester. So even if a student meets all other criteria, but they begin in the spring semester, they would not be eligible to receive MSJC Promise. Whereas the California College Promise Grant has no limitation on what semester a student begins their education. MSJC Promise requires at least a 2.0 for each semester of enrollment, whereas the CCPG requires that academic standards are being met. And then finally, the payment method. This is where a lot of students get confused about the function of the MSJC Promise, because unlike CCPG, students must pay for their courses up front. When their eligibility is confirmed, at that point, they would be awarded MSJC Promise and they would be reimbursed for the tuition costs. And this would apply to every semester. The CCPG, however, acts like a tuition fee waiver. If the student is awarded CCPG before they register for their courses, they would be able to register without paying because that's when the CCPG is used to go ahead and cover that cost. All right, so on to impacts of to student enrollment. So first thing is the California College Promise Grant. It is awarded to many of our students, but not all of them. Sometimes students assume that they're going to receive it, or that financial aid will automatically pay for their courses when they enroll, but that's not always the case. So students who have been awarded CCPG, their classes are paid for when they enroll, but for students who are not, they do have a certain time frame that they must pay for their courses. Typically before the start of the semester, they have about 4 days from the date that they enroll to pay. And then once the semester begins, they do have to pay same day or they will be dropped from their courses. Additionally, students are also expected to pay mandatory student fees on their own. There isn't any financial aid that's set aside specifically for covering those fees, and they are typically around $40. We also see oftentimes where students do not provide their social security number when they apply to MSJC, which would make it so that we're unable to receive their financial aid application. And this can cause delays in the student being awarded and also then being able to enroll in courses depending on their circumstance. So it's really important that students provide that information if applicable to them, if they have a social security number. We also see sometimes that students show as non-California residents, even though they do meet the criteria to be considered a resident. And this would impact any state aid that they might be eligible for, including the California College Promise Grant. So it is important that they make sure that their residency status is correct because the tuition costs do differ greatly based on residency status, and we want to make sure that they're being charged the appropriate tuition. And then additionally, sometimes we do see that a student has graduated high school, but in our records, they're still showing as a K through 12 student, which would make them ineligible for financial aid. So this is another important aspect that we emphasize to students and making sure that they are checking to make sure that their graduation status is accurate. Okay, so impacts to financial aid eligibility. So although the financial aid applications are open for roughly 21 months for each academic year, we do recommend that students submit their application between October 1st and March 2nd, as there are some grants, as Susana previously mentioned, like the Cal Grant, that do have their own deadlines in order to be considered for them. The March 2nd deadline, we refer to that as the priority deadline, and that's the Cal Grant. So for example, like for the four-year university, because we do have that supplemental one for California community colleges. If they didn't submit their application by March 2nd, then it doesn't guarantee that they're going to be considered for that Cal Grant. Next, we have maintaining satisfactory academic progress, or SAP. Which is a key part of maintaining financial aid eligibility. We have 3 academic standards that all must be met, which are the cumulative completion rate of at least a 67%, a cumulative GPA of at least a 2.0, and completing their program of study within 150 of the minimum required units. So if even just one of these standards is not being met when we evaluate satisfactory academic progress, students will go into a warning status and they are notified of this. And so they're still able to receive their financial aid when they're in this warning status. And they are given another semester to go ahead and try and bring, whether it's their GPA, their units, or their completion rate up to the required standard. If the students fail to meet SAP standards upon the completion of the semester that they were in a warning status, they would go into a denied status and be unable to receive their financial aid again until they are able to meet those SAP standards, or they submit an appeal and the appeal is approved. And these SAP standards do apply to our dual and concurrent enrollment students as well. Okay, so enrollment status also plays a factor in this. And sorry. So for example, a student might be might have been receiving the California, sorry, the Cal grant. But in order to actually receive it, the student would need to be enrolled at least half time at 6 units. So at six units, the student can receive half of their Cal grant amount, whereas if the student were enrolled at 12 units, then they would receive the full amount. So with that 6 unit minimum or half time minimum, if a student was below that 6 units, they would be ineligible to receive their Cal grant. So that's just one of the ways that enrollment status does impact financial aid, because many of our grants are prorated. And then finally on this slide, we have institutional deadlines, which are also really important to pay attention to for our students who might be asked to provide additional documentation. We do have deadlines for those documents to be submitted, as well as any appeals that we offer. They each have their own deadline as well. And all of our deadlines and important dates are listed on the MSJC website on the financial aid page under the disbursement schedule and important dates tab. Financial aid checklist. So once students submit their financial aid application, they do receive an email confirmation from us. Depending on where we're at in the academic year and which application they're submitting, that determines when they're going to hear from us. So for example, although some students have already submitted the 2023-2024 application, maybe several weeks ago to several months ago, they haven't received that email confirmation from us yet because we have not begun to process the applications for the upcoming academic year yet. Whereas students who are still submitting the 2022-2003 financial aid application hear from us about 3 to 5 business days after they have submitted their application. And so the email confirmation that we send out lets them know that we've received their application, and we also let them know to either log into their self-service account to view their award letter or to view their award, their financial aid checklist, which just lets them know if we need any additional documentation or information from them. If the student does have any additional tasks, they will be able to access a link on their checklist that takes them to another website called Student Forms that we use, and they would need to create a Student Forms account in order to provide and upload that additional documentation for review. All right, so in order to assist continuing and transferring students with the cost of attending college, the MSJC Foundation does offer scholarships. There are 2 application periods, one in the fall and one in the spring, and the dates and additional information are provided on the MSJC website on the financial aid, on the foundation page. The application considers students for many scholarships, each having their own unique eligibility criteria that's typically set by the donors. And once an account is created, students have access to all of the information during the application periods. All right, so workshop offerings. So throughout the year, we do offer workshops on a variety of topics in order to support students and help them develop the ability to make educated decisions when it comes to finances and attaining their educational goals. All the dates, links, and times are accessible on the MSJC's financial aid webpage. So I'll just briefly go over a couple of the workshops that we offer. We do have a line-by-line workshop that goes over the FAFSA, which is also called the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and the California DREAM Act application. So in those ones, we go over pretty in-depth each application and let students know what needs to be input at which part of the application. We also have our SAP 101, which covers satisfactory academic progress policy and how academic performance can impact financial aid eligibility. Then we also have the SAP petition process. which aids students who experienced extenuating circumstances, which led to them not meeting the necessary academic standards, and would like to petition to reinstate their financial aid eligibility. We also have Getting to the Money, which assists students with navigating their financial aid checklist and just provides information on other financial resources at MSJC, as well as answering any individual questions that students might have. And then Financial Literacy, which aims to provide students with the knowledge and resources to make financially informed decisions that help establish financial literacy and freedom. Outreach requests. So as many of you are already aware, but in case you aren't, if you would like to request that the financial aid office attend an event for your school, please go ahead and check out the outreach page that's on the MSJC website. You can access the outreach request form there and also find the contact information for Beth, who is one of our outreach contacts. The requests do go directly to her, and then we would coordinate with her about the event. We do our best to attend every date requested, but depending on the availability of the department, we may need to offer alternative dates. Because of this, we do ask that you submit an outreach request at least 2 weeks ahead of time so that we can do our best to make it on the requested original date. All right. So here's just some of our contact information, our phone number, email, and a link to our webpage. All of this information can be found online as well. And please do keep in mind that we are open Monday through Thursday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. if you do plan on contacting us. And then at this time, we're going to go ahead and open it up to any questions that you guys might have.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. So as she was going, I was dropping in a lot of those links in the chat. So if any of those might be helpful to you, feel free to grab a screenshot of those or open them up. And if there are any questions, you can feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you, or drop your question in the chat. We'll be happy to answer it. And yes, Crystal, Beth is great. I'll give it a minute for any questions that might be coming through. I know that there's some other sessions going on here in a minute, so we want to make sure you all have enough time for that transition. And if there's anything that you might want to refer back to, I believe Jenny will be sharing the recording of this meeting. So hopefully if there is something that you maybe missed or wanted to hear a second time, you'll be able to watch our recording once that is sent out. Well, if there's no questions, that means we did a really good job in the presentation and covered so many bases. So I'll give another minute and then we'll go ahead and close out our session. Thank you, Betty. I hope and I'm glad it was helpful. So I see a question in the chat. So AB 540 students coming in from another country during their junior year, are they not eligible? So if a student is meeting AB 540 eligibility criteria, they will be considered. I would say this question maybe is on a case-by-case basis, depending on, sometimes it depends on what country they're coming from, what type of documentation they might have. So definitely still encourage students to apply. And if there is additional information that we need to verify in our office, we will reach out to that student directly to resolve any conflicting or information that we might need to assist that student. I will stop the recording just in case there's any questions that you might want to ask outside of the recording. So let me go ahead and pause that.